Okay, so we've got these two really fascinating documents in front of us. Declassified CIA records from 1974 and 1964.
Right.
We're diving deep today into this thing called the 201 system
Okay.
and a specific operation involving a journalist and his network.
Very cool.
Yeah, this is going to be good.
Excited.
Our mission for you listening is to really help you understand what these documents tell us about how information was managed and how these operations were actually conducted back then.
Sure.
Yeah, way back when. And we're really focusing on what stands out as, interesting and insightful for you
Absolutely.
in understanding this historical approach to intelligence.
I think what's so fascinating when you look at these two documents side by side is you get to see both the nuts and bolts of how something worked and then a real-world example of it in action.
Right.
You've got this 1974 document. It's Annex B of Chapter 3, DOHB 71.1.
Catchy title.
Yeah, super catchy. But basically, it lays out the 201 system. And you can think of this as like the agency's filing cabinet for people, right? How they kept track of individuals. And then you've got this other document, a dispatch from March 1964.
Okay.
And it details typical operational activities.
I like that typic/operational. It's very specific.
Very official.
Yeah.
That sounds very serious.
It does. But it's all concerning someone with the code name N-Carbon-1.
Ooh. Very mysterious.
Very mysterious.
I like it.
So we're going to connect these two for you so you can really see how the agency thought about individuals and then how that actually translated into action.
Right. So let's break it down, starting with the structure.
Okay.
The 201 system itself, as described in this 1974 document,
Right.
they outline it as a method for basically pinpointing and keeping tabs on information about people who were of operational interest. What's important to understand right away is this wasn't some huge dragnet.
It is intended for a relatively select group of people.
Right.
Those connected to ongoing operations, intelligence reports, potential targets. So it was a focused approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the term operational interest is crucial here.
Okay.
This wasn't just like a general database of every person the CIA ever came across.
Yeah.
This was specifically about managing information on people who were directly relevant to their intelligence objectives and their activities.
So not just anyone walking down the street.
No. This is not
They're not just like randomly picking people.
Facebook for the CIA.
Yeah, exactly.
This is much more targeted. And that focus, I think, tells you something about how they prioritize their information gathering.
So right at the center of this 201 system is what they call the 201 number.
All right.
Every person in the system was assigned a unique identifier.
Like a serial number.
Yeah, like 201 123 4567 or something.
Exactly.
It's almost like how a library assigns a unique number to every book.
That's a great analogy.
Right. So this number was the key to then pulling up all the information they had on someone across different files and reports.
That's right. The 201 number acted as that unique index key. And it ensured that no matter where information about an individual was stored in different reports, different departments, it could all be linked back to that single number.
Smart.
Yeah, it really was. And that's crucial when you think about the volume of information they were dealing with. It was the central pin in their information web about a person.
Then there's this thing called the 201 dossier.
Right.
This was basically the main central file for each person in the system. And inside this dossier, there was a standard opening form, Form 831,
Yes.
which had basic biographical details, their current situation as far as the agency knew, and any operational detail.
Right, like a snapshot of who this person is and their relevance to the agency.
Yeah, it's like the official record folder for everything they had compiled.
Absolutely. The one-stop shop for all things 201.
On this individual.
I like it.
And to make things even more organized, they also had this thing called the Master 201 record.
Yeah, this is really cool.
What is that?
Because the document mentions this was machine generated. So even back in 1974, they were using technology to manage this.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Ahead of their time.
A little bit. Yeah, this master record would point you not only to the main dossier, but also highlight any other places where information on that person might exist.
Okay.
Including any special lists they were on.
So it's like the dossier is the book, and the master record is like the digital card catalog telling you where to find it.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay.
A perfect analogy.
Now here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm ready.
The document details these OI codes, operational interest codes. These are two-letter abbreviations that were tagged alongside the 201 number, and they essentially tell you why this person was in the system in the first place.
Right.
There were general OI codes listed in Attachment 4, which seemed to cover intelligence services or specific organizations. It's like a quick label explaining their significance.
It's a label. It's a
Oh.
category. It's like almost like a hashtag
Hashtag, yeah.
before there were hashtags
Yeah.
to say, okay, this is why this person matters to us.
This is why we're keeping tabs.
Exactly. And what's fascinating about these OI codes is how much information is packed into just those 2 letters.
Right.
Right? It gives someone an immediate understanding of an individual's connection to intelligence activity. So instead of having to dig through pages of a dossier,
Right.
you see the OI code and you get a sense,
Instant recognition.
instant recognition. Were they linked to a hostile intelligence service?
Mm-hmm.
Were they a potential asset? Were they something else entirely?
Okay.
It provides crucial context right away.
Wow. So the handbook also is very specific about how these 201 dossiers were initiated.
Yeah, the paperwork is important.
Right.
Yeah, got to follow the procedures.
And it says that usually it was the responsibility of an operational component within the agency to start one.
Right,
But then it lists some automatic triggers.
like red flags.
Right. So, for instance, any positively identified member of the Arab Republic of Egypt intelligence services holding a rank of 3rd secretary or higher, they automatically got a dossier.
Instant 201.
The same went for intelligence officers in British Commonwealth services
At a certain level.
at a certain level.
Right.
And all Soviets assigned to official posts like embassies or even news media outlets.
Wow.
So that really gives you a clear picture of who they were actively monitoring.
It absolutely does. And I think this list of automatic triggers is so revealing because it shows you what the agency's priorities and concerns were during this period, the Cold War.
Yeah.
The focus on individuals connected to specific nations and organizations really highlights the geopolitical tensions of the time.
Right.
And the inclusion of media personnel within those structures is particularly interesting.
Yeah.
It suggests that they were really concerned about both intelligence gathering through these channels
Yeah.
and potentially even influence.
So let's talk about the information itself. What kind of information actually ended up inside these dossiers?
Right, so the document mentions this 201 personality file action request, Form 831 again.
Ah, yes. More forms.
More forms, always more forms.
Bureaucracy at its finest.
But then it lists a whole bunch of other things, biographical details like photos, fingerprints, handwriting samples, personal record questionnaires.
Wow, so they really were building a comprehensive profile.
Oh yeah, they were aiming for as complete a picture as they could possibly get. And this really underscores the level of detail and the systematic approach they were taking. They weren't relying on just hearsay or vague impressions. They wanted concrete, verifiable information.
I see.
And including things like handwriting samples and fingerprints,
Yeah.
suggests a real concern for verifying identities
Right.
and potentially even tracking movements or activities.
And it wasn't just internal documents, right? The guide mentions operational and security approvals, records of name checks, requests for information security clearances, and even newspaper clippings, if they contained relevant information.
So they're going out into the world and pulling in information too.
Exactly.
It's not just what they're generating internally.
Yeah, they were pulling information from all sorts of sources.
Yeah, and I think if we connect this back to what this means for us today, you can see how they were trying to create this 360-degree view of an individual
Yeah.
by incorporating publicly available information, like newspaper articles. They could track their activities, their connections, even changes in their public profile over time.
Interesting.
And that all helped to supplement the information they were gathering through their own operations.
So the document, also being, a handbook,
Right.
goes into the practical side of how to keep these dossiers up to date.
Got to keep things tidy.
Right.
Yeah. Got to get rid of old information, how to handle documents that were temporarily put aside, what they call deferred documents.
I love that term, deferred documents.
Yeah, it's very official.
It makes them sound so important.
Right.
Like top secret.
Oh, absolutely.
Deferred documents.
Yeah.
Okay, so the guide also talks about how these things called field index cards worked.
Right.
And crucially, who had permission to access all this information.
Yeah, and this is really important because we're talking about sensitive information here.
Absolutely.
Potentially damaging information if it fell into the wrong hands. So they even had a specific form, a file restriction notice, Form 2021.
Of course there's a form.
Of course there's form.
Got to have a form for everything.
And you would use this if a dossier was considered especially sensitive.
Okay, so these procedures really highlight just how important security and control were
Yeah,
when dealing with this kind of information.
absolutely. And the rules about purging outdated material suggest they were also trying to keep the system manageable
Right.
and
It's
focused.
not just overflowing. Yeah,
Exactly. No one wants a file cabinet that's bursting at the seams.
definitely not.
And then the restrictions on who can actually access these files
Right.
really underscores the potential risks if this information got out. And then that file restriction notice add like another layer of protection
Okay.
for the most critical files.
Now, there's a whole section here on requests for information on 201 personalities.
Yes. This is the operational side of things.
It seems really important.
It is how the system was actually used in practice.
So it says that if a 201 file was restricted, you had to go through this automated index section.
Right, IPAI.
IPAIs.
Yes.
And even if you didn't have a specific 201 number, but you had enough other identifying details, they would still try to process your request.
They do their best to find what you needed.
And you could even make requests over the phone.
Right.
And they would call you back.
Wow, so high tech.
I know, right?
Back in the day.
Cutting edge stuff.
Rotary phones and intelligence gathering.
Rotary phones and intelligence gathering.
Yeah.
Perfect combination. And for more involved requests, they might respond through secure channels or even with a physical courier.
Wow, so this really shows you that this system wasn't just a static archive.
Right.
It's a working resource that people in the agency needed to actually use. And the different methods for requesting information, from a quick phone call to a formal request that needed a courier,
Right.
reflects the different levels of urgency and sensitivity.
Okay, so that's the 201 system broadly.
Right.
Now let's switch gears completely
Okay, let's do it.
and look at this 1964 dispatch about Ann Carbon 1.
Okay.
This message details the agency's relationship with a journalist, and apparently it all began with a memo in September 1962 suggesting they developed this relationship following an investigation into a security breach.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So the concern was that another individual, Ann Carbon 2, was potentially sharing sensitive information about something called the Yobelt South Campus matter.
Yobelt South Campus.
With Ann Carbon 1.
That has a real ring to it.
I know, right?
It's very cloak and dagger.
Very mysterious. So this is where you can see the human element and all the complexities of intelligence work really come to the forefront.
Absolutely. And the initial reason for even engaging with Ann Carbon 1 in the first place stemmed from a concern about protecting sensitive information.
Right.
So it shows how different aspects of intelligence, counterintelligence, and intelligence gathering often intersect.
And then the mention of these specific code names and operations like Yobelt South Campus gives you a glimpse into the actual operational context.
The real world
of this relationship.
What's going on.
Here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay, get me.
The dispatch outlines the operational support that they actually provided to Ann Carbon 1.
Okay.
So on one occasion, Ann Carbon 1 used this thing they called Identity 3.
Identity 3.
Which they clarify corresponds to the Miami News to conduct journalistic activities.
So he's like undercover.
He's basically undercover. Yeah. And specifically, he was investigating a Cuban training camp in Florida.
Yeah.
And get this, the handling of this entire investigation was done under a separate cover designation.
So they were really trying to keep this compartmentalized.
Very hush-hush.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they were actively leveraging a legitimate news outlet for their own purposes.
Right. And that raises some really interesting questions.
About the relationship between the agency and the press.
It does, absolutely. And it was clearly a very close relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't just passively receiving information from Ann Carbon 1.
No, they were actively involved in facilitating his work as a journalist.
Wow.
To the point of him operating under the banner of this specific news organization.
And then it goes on to say that the agency also facilitated contacts for Ann Carbon 1.
Okay.
With various individuals, newspaper editors, law enforcement officials, even other intelligence sources.
So they're really helping him build his network and open doors for him.
And the goal seemed to be to sort of guide Ann Carbon 1's reporting in certain directions.
Right.
And then obviously to gather information through his journalistic endeavors.
So they're trying to leverage his access.
Exactly, for their own benefit.
For their own intelligence objectives.
And for instance, they provided him with information about anti-Castro exile training camps.
Wow. So they're actively feeding him information as well.
Yeah.
Not just contacts, but actual intelligence.
It's a two-way street here.
It is.
But it wasn't always smooth sailing.
Okay.
The dispatch also reveals instances where Ant Carbon 1's reporting actually caused some internal friction.
Oh, interesting. So it backfired sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in one case, an article he wrote about what were described as irresponsible publicity stunts by anti-Castro groups caused concern within the agency.
Yeah, we're happy about that.
No, they were not happy. And some even suggested that his Identity 3 might have difficulty continuing journalistic cooperation.
Oh, that sounds like a threat.
Yeah, it does sound like a veiled threat if he kept publishing these kinds of stories.
Toe the line.
Yeah.
Or else.
So this really demonstrates for you, listening, the inherent challenges in trying to work with individuals outside the agency.
Right.
Who have their own professional obligations and perspective.
Yeah, you can't always control the narrative.
Exactly. And you can't always control
Even when you're the CIA.
Especially when you're dealing with someone who has, a public platform.
And their own integrity as a journalist.
Yeah. So it's a risky game.
It is.
Despite these occasional disagreements, the dispatch does mention that they did gain positive intelligence.
So it was worth it for them.
It was worth it in the end.
Okay.
Through this relationship.
Interesting.
While they acknowledge that Ant Carbon 1 might not have access to, the most highly classified information.
Right.
They believe he offered valuable insights into Latin American politics and the local media environment.
So he had his finger on the pulse.
Yeah, exactly. And this assessment of positive intelligence, even with its limitations, really highlights the agency's perceived benefits of this relationship.
They saw value in it, even if it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, and even if Ant Carbon 1 wasn't privy to top-secret intelligence, his access to local sources and his understanding of the regional dynamics were considered valuable assets.
It's all about different levels of access and different perspectives.
Right.
And he brought something unique to the table.
Absolutely. And the dispatch concludes with the request that a 201 number be assigned to Ant Carbon 1.
Ah, so they're bringing it all together.
Bringing it all together. Full circle. And that the relevant station, JMW Wave, be informed. So this directly links this real-world operation back to the 201 system we discussed earlier. And it really shows you how individuals involved in these kinds of activities were formally tracked and managed.
Officially brought into the fold.
Within the agency's information framework.
It's fascinating how this one dispatch connects all the dots.
It does. And the dispatch even lists all the various identities connected to Ant Carbon 1.
Okay, like aliases.
Yeah, including the Miami News, the Sunland Training Center for Retarded Children, the Miami Herald, a Latin American editor, and the LUDA.
It's quite a range.
Right. Yeah. So it just shows you the breadth of his connections and activities.
And the complexity of this relationship that the agency was managing.
It's not just black and white.
Yeah.
It's very nuanced.
Very gray.
So what does all this mean for you listening today?
Right. What's the takeaway?
These documents really give us a peek behind the curtain of how intelligence was conducted and how information was managed during this really interesting period.
Back in the Cold War.
The 201 system illustrates the very systematic and bureaucratic approach to categorizing and controlling information about individuals.
Right, very structured.
It's very structured. And then the Ant Carbon 1 dispatch gives us this concrete example of the much more complex reality of engaging with people outside the agency.
Yeah, the messy human side of things.
Particularly those in the media.
Where you can't always predict what's going to happen.
Right, and you can see the meticulousness of their record keeping.
All those forms.
And the information retrieval within the 201 system.
Right.
And it reflects a very specific way of thinking.
That's very structured way.
About intelligence.
Yeah.
And then you contrast that with the Ant Carbon 1 operation, and you see the much more fluid and nuanced world of human intelligence.
Where you're cultivating sources and you're dealing with relationships.
Exactly, and navigating those relationships.
Which are always unpredictable.
So we see just how much care they took in documenting information, their strategic use of media connections, and also the potential for these tensions when you're trying to utilize someone's public platform for often covert purposes.
Right. It's a delicate balancing act.
It definitely gives you a sense of just how intricate and challenging this kind of work really is.
It is. And I think this deep dive, as you said, only scratches the surface.
Absolutely.
You know, as a listener, you might be wondering about the specifics of that initial security breach involving Yobelt.
Yeah. What was that all about?
What actually happened there?
And the full extent to which Carbon One's reporting was influenced.
Right. Were there other instances?
Or even shaped
Yeah.
by the agency.
Did they kill stories?
Right.
Did they push him in certain directions?
Did they feed him disinformation even?
Right. And what were the long-term consequences
Yeah.
of this kind of relationship for everyone involved?
So many questions.
So
many questions.
And these documents really do provide just a fascinating glimpse.
A snapshot.
Into this specific time.
A moment in time.
And raise so many questions.
Yeah, it's a great jumping off point.
For further consideration.
Absolutely, for more research.
Thank you for bringing these to our attention.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
They offer a really insightful look into the intelligence practices of the past.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.